building?
The stone is in this casket, said to be in this casket. The reports I have received from the Roric Museum would have that stone in this Rajput casket in the cornerstone of the master building.
The interest of men like Albert Einstein, Henry Wallace, and not to mention all the foreign dignitaries, becomes quite intriguing when one considers the full contents of the casket that was said to be placed inside the cornerstone.
I'm familiar with the ingredients of the Rajput casket by having read letters from Zina Fosdick and her own notebook entries, and also because Aida Tolskaya herself, one of the co-curators of the Roric Museum, wrote out what Zina Fosdick had stated they had placed in the Rajput casket in Darjeeling before it was delivered to the city of New York to be placed in the cornerstone.
As Buff Perry explained, the letter that describes the contents of the casket comes from Zina Fosdick, a long-time devoted disciple of Nicholas Roric, who would later become the director of the Roric Museum. The museum photo collection is filled with images of Fosdick alongside Roric while they were in Darjeeling, India, where the casket was prepared. As such, it stands to reason that she would have known the details of what they put inside.
The letter's written by Zina Fosdick, and it was actually an entry in her diary. And what's written here is an accounting of all of the ingredients that are in the Rajput casket that was prepared in Darjeeling, India, in 1928 to be delivered to New York, to Manhattan, and to be placed in the cornerstone of the master building. There are a lot of interesting things that were placed in the Rajput casket. For example, an image of Maitreya printed on Tibetan paper.
As we showed earlier, in the occult belief, the Maitreya is said to be the last Messiah that will come.
The Maitreya is seen as the final deliverer and incarnation in the Buddhist tradition. Again, he's also Kalki in the Hindu tradition, the 10th incarnation of Vishnu. Vishnu is the great god of Hinduism. So they're not mixing up Jesus with Maitreya, but they are seeing Maitreya as a messianic figure, a world Messiah, who would answer all of the expectations of all the world religions at one time.
The reason Roric would not mix up Jesus with Maitreya is because of the New Age belief that Maitreya is the true Christ, while Jesus was only his disciple. This is also the teaching of Scottish mystic Benjamin Creme.
Maitreya embodies what we call the Christ principle, the Christ consciousness. And 2,000 years ago, he overshadowed his disciple, Jesus. Jesus was not the Christ, except for 3 years. Over these 3 years, from the baptism to the crucifixion, Jesus was overshadowed by Maitreya. And when he spoke, sometimes it was Maitreya speaking, sometimes it was Jesus.
We featured Creme in our last documentary, Riddles in Stone. He is the founder of Share International and has been declaring for more than 30 years that Maitreya would be arriving soon.
Maitreya is standing by, ready to come into the world at any moment.
When we spoke with Creme in 2006, he had just come from speaking to the United Nations.
While I was in New York, I gave a talk at the United Nations, and there was a large group of New York Theosophists. A certain number from outside the United Nations were allowed to come to the talk. And they were very responsive, very responsive.
These Theosophists are modern members of the Theosophical Society, of which both Nicholas Roric and Henry Wallace were members. Other famous members included Thomas Edison and Mahatma Gandhi, as well as Gandhi's close friend Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. Also pictured here, beside Nicholas Roric. But in addition to the image of Maitreya, what were the rest of the contents buried inside the cornerstone of the master building?
A portrait of M.M. This, I believe, is Master Maitreya.
Master Maitreya was one of the names given to a spirit that is said to have inspired Madame H.P. Blavatsky. Roric's wife, Helena, claimed that the same spirit was in contact with her and inspired her writings.
It's Master Maitreya, who is actually Helena Roric, channeling this entity, if I can put it that way.
One of her books was titled On Eastern Crossroads, in which she wrote extensively about the stone in her husband's possession, calling it the Serpent Stone, and saying, "The stone cometh, and it is a most grievous error to deny the stone." In fact, the quote from one of Henry Wallace's Guru letters about the new country that goes forth and the admonition to await the stone comes directly from this book.
Nicholas Roric tended more to write about, sort of physical reality and the adventures in the Himalayan mountains, in the Altai region toward the Himalayan mountains, where his wife, Helena, wrote about the channeling and the esoterica, the theosophical kind of side of things.
While Roric's writings may have dealt with reality, his paintings were anything but. Dedicated to universal archetypes, and with them, the promise of a sacred treasure. That brings us to the third, and perhaps most important item, placed inside the cornerstone of the master building.
They're all people who had varying kinds of relations with Nicholas Roric. They were channelers, they were followers. But to me, personally, greatest interest is this side statement that Aida Toskaya, who was also one of the curators of the Roric Museum, wrote. Sina omits a piece of the stone that was placed in the casket. This goes back to that famous stone that the Rorics became a cause célèbre because of, and many other people wrote about later. Everything changed once they received this. 1924 marked a whole new direction for them all. And this came about, I think, this is 1924. You'll see the casket here is the same casket there.
And this is a burning casket of some kind.
Yeah, Chintamani. Chintamani is a Sanskrit term that means a stone of wisdom, that he calls the treasure of the world, and that's how he depicted the treasure of the world, the ultimate treasure of the world.
It seems only appropriate that this treasure hunt would take us back to Manly Hall's society in Los Angeles, and in particular to one of the graduates there, from the University of Philosophical Research, a Freemason named Gavin Wentz. On his website, he quotes a curious passage from Eschenbach's Grail legend, with a clear reference to the Knights Templar. The passage reads, "Wherever these Templars receive victory or defeat, I will tell you by what they live. They live with a stone. If you do not know it by name, I will name it for you. It is called Lapis exilis. The stone is also called the Grail. Eschenbach's reference to the Knights Templar is curious. During the same period that he wrote his Grail legend, the Templar Church of Garway, England was built. Inside we find mysterious symbols carved above what appears to be the outline of a man. These carvings are said to be a depiction of the Holy Grail, the chalice shown here. In the midst of it is a traditional Catholic host with a cross in the center. But inside the chalice, just beneath the host, is what appears to be a truncated pyramid. Which brings us back to Gavin Wince, who produced an award-winning documentary which he titled Lapis exilis, based on a variant spelling of the Grail name given by von Eschenbach. This slight alteration to the original name had been recorded in the diary of Nicholas Roric.
And it seems to be a contraction of several words in the Eschenbach example, but clearly in Roric's example, Lapis exilis means the exiled stone, or the wandering stone, or the stone that comes in from somewhere else.
The word lapis is simply Latin for the stone. But how was this stone envisioned by Roric and his disciple Henry Wallace? Roric described the stone as a type of moldavite, the meteoric stone of green or emerald color. This would seem to fit with the description given by von Eschenbach in the 12th century. On his website, dedicated to the stone's history, Freemason Gavin Wince came to this conclusion about just what Nicholas Roric envisioned as Lapis exilis, the stone they call the Grail. Is it really possible that Roric, Wallace, and even FDR believed the Great Seal was a representation of the Holy Grail? And if so, then, as the treasure of the world, would this explain why the US dollar has been used from the time of FDR onward to send financial aid to nearly all the countries of the earth, for the establishment of a global society? During his 2008 presidential campaign, Barack Obama was criticized for wanting to spread the wealth. But in reality, the redistribution of wealth, a socialist tenet, is a practice that the United States has engaged in at a global level for more than half a century, beginning in the aftermath of World War II.
We want peace and prosperity for the world as a whole.
The United States now is conducting a new kind of foreign aid program. Aid not for destroyed industrial nations, but for developing countries with limited knowledge of modern technology. Many are just emerging from colonial status. American aid seeks to lay the foundations for industrial and agricultural growth. It is motivated by the humanitarian ideals of the American people and
But now that the economy of the American people has taken a turn, and it seems that the dollar is declining fast, how could this fit in to the plan of the secret societies? Consider that when the shock waves of the American stock market shook the world, France and China called for a global currency and a new world order. Which brings us to the other half of the dollar bill's design, the American eagle, that some believe represents the mythical phoenix, a bird that is said to destroy itself by fire. But according to Wolfram von Eschenbach, the power of the phoenix lies in the stone of destiny. In Parsifal, he writes, "By virtue of this stone, the phoenix is burned to ashes, in which she is reborn. Thus does the phoenix molt her feathers, after which she shines dazzling and bright, and as lovely as before. If these ideas are truly embraced by secret societies, could this suggest the intentional destruction of the American dollar, which will then force our financial networks into a global economy, resulting in a new Atlantean empire that extends to all the earth? As Buff Perry mentioned earlier, the stone is also called the Chintamani stone. As a symbol, the stone unites the occult traditions of both Eastern and Western mysticism. One thing is certain: those who practice the occult believe this artifact is the key to achieving the great work of all secret societies. Mark Amaru Pinkham is the co-director of a group called the International Order of Gnostic Templars. In his article titled Nicholas Roric and the Chintamani Stone, a Holy Grail from Sirius, he writes that data regarding the Chintamani Stone maintains that it was brought to Earth by Syrian missionaries to eventually help precipitate a one-world civilization. He says there is some indication that one part of the stone has been the sacred stone of the Kaaba, which has united millions of Muslims around the globe. Pinkham goes on to write that it is known that a portion of the Chintamani stone was given to the League of Nations, whose stated goals were the creation of a one-world civilization. The association of the stone as a symbol of unity is an important part of how it is said to have come to America.
It has to do with the secret history of America and why that stone arrived here, who brought it.
Oddly enough, this mysterious artifact may provide the missing link to understanding how America has gone from being a Christian nation to a country beset with pagan statues, pagan monuments, and occult icons. For years, Buff Perry was financed by a leading member of the Philosophical Research Society to hunt down this stone of destiny.
I learned about this stone going into Roric's hands through the director of the Rosicrucian Order, the curator of the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose, California.
The whole concept of the stone as the Holy Grail represents the so-called perfecting of mankind. This is the theme of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. As Manly Hall writes, to the mystic, the stone is divine power, an ancient symbol of the perfected and regenerated man, whose divine nature shines forth. After years of research, Buff Perry now believes the stone was brought to America by secret societies from Scotland in the years preceding the American Revolution. For them, the stone was to empower the foundation of a new republic.
Why is it called the foundation stone for America?
The foundation stone for America because it was brought here by the Jacobites who had been arrested at Preston in 1715 in their attempt to overthrow the kings.
The kings in question are the line of English kings who succeeded King James II, who was deposed from his throne in 1688 and succeeded by William of Orange. But the supporters of James rebelled against the deposing of their favored monarch. They were called Jacobites, a name derived from Jacobus, the Latin version of James. In short, the Jacobites were mostly Scottish Highlanders who were determined to restore James and the House of Stuart to the English throne. But the reason King James II was deposed presents a powerful clue as to why America has been steadily transformed into a cornucopia of pagan and occult philosophies.
King James had proclaimed that Jews and Presbyterians and Quakers and Catholics and even Ottomans should be embraced by the Church of England. That's why he was deposed. So the subsequent formation of this Jacobite revolutionary social order was in reaction to his deposition and in support of his embrace of Jews, Presbyterians, Quakers, Catholics, and Ottoman Muslims.
Since the Protestant English rejected James' ecumenical ideas and also feared that the hand of Rome was somehow involved, the Scottish Jacobites engaged in a series of rebellions against the new line of English kings. But their rebellions were ultimately crushed, and as a result, many of the Jacobite fugitives fled across the waters of the Atlantic to America.
In 1715, there was a rebellion in a place called Preston, northern England. Many of the Jacobites were arrested and deported or exiled to America. Standish family, Anson family, notable families in American history, pre-revolutionary history. Families that then went on to become part of the War of Independence, the American Revolution. Notable Masons and Freemasons.
These notable Freemasons were the survivors of the Jacobite resistance in Scotland, a land with a long history of secret societies, whose influence is both mysterious and extensive. Consider that centuries earlier, the Knights Templar fled persecution and are said to have hidden themselves within the Masonic lodges of Scotland. In the 19th century, Albert Pike would develop the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which would become the most powerful arm of Masonry in America. Meanwhile, President Woodrow Wilson once said that every line of strength in American history is a line colored with Scottish blood. Perhaps the best example of the Jacobite influence in early America is found in Hugh Mercer, often called an unsung hero of the American Revolution. Mercer was a Jacobite doctor who supported the cause against England until their final defeat at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. He was then forced to flee to America, leaving his homeland behind. He served as Brigadier General in the Continental Army and was a close personal advisor to George Washington. It's even believed that it was Hugh Mercer who suggested that General Washington make his famous crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas of 1776. Incredibly, one of Hugh Mercer's children would marry into the Patton family and ultimately produce World War II hero General George S. Patton, whose blood and guts reputation was certainly in keeping with the Jacobite tradition. But in the years prior to the American Revolution, Hugh Mercer became a member of the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, Virginia, the early members of which are said to be a who's who of Revolutionary War heroes. Mercer's fellow members included George Washington and James Monroe. At least 8 Masons from this lodge served as generals during the American Revolution, while 2 of them would go on to become American presidents. The Fredericksburg Lodge still exists today, and on its website states that it was chartered by the Grand Lodge of Scotland, July 21st, 1758. A history of the lodge says the following. The lodge was formed by men who had been made Masons earlier and elsewhere, Scotland most likely. There was in Fredericksburg in the 1750s a notable Scottish mercantile presence. Many of those early lodge members bore Scottish surnames, and it was to Scotland, not England, that the lodge later turned for a proper charter. Is it possible that the influence of the Scottish Jacobite rebels worked as an undercurrent that helped to inspire the American Revolution?
These families, they come under the general umbrella term Jacobite, were the real core population that led to ultimately to the War of Independence.
Consider that the 3 Jacobite uprisings are referred to as rebellions. During the Revolutionary era, the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God," was adopted, a motto that Benjamin Franklin wanted to include on the design of the Great Seal. But rebellion against authority was not exactly the tradition of the Puritan Pilgrims who began the country. Their focus was on the biblical teaching of Jesus and the apostles. When Harvard University was founded in 1636, its motto was "Truth for Christ and the Church." Harvard's statement of purpose went on to say that the main end of life and studies is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. But by the Revolutionary era, references to God were more ambiguous, often referring to the guidance of divine providence. It has been noted that the revolutionary founders were not known for quoting the sayings of Jesus Christ. They certainly mentioned his name or made reference to Christianity. They said things like, "No king but King Jesus." But his teachings were absent from their writings. Sayings like, "Turn the other cheek," "Love your enemies," and "Bless them that curse you," had no place in a movement that was founded on rebellion. As a result, it becomes little surprise that once the new republic was founded, biblical imagery of Christ and the Gospels would be missing from the capital city. Instead, a celebration of pagan gods and goddesses would prevail, which seems to represent the ecumenical views of King James II and his Masonic Jacobite rebels. The chief Jacobite symbol was the white rose, traditionally worn on their Scottish bonnets. This dagger features a Jacobite rose with a pentagram in the center. Notice that the pentagram has a dot in the middle, which usually signifies the sun. The 5 points of the star symbolize the rotation of Venus around the sun, forming a pentagram over an 8-year cycle. This symbol was well known to the secret societies of Europe and is found carved throughout Washington, D.C. In light of these things, the question Americans today should ask is, if the idea of rebellion was in obedience to God, what God did they mean? Which brings us back to the Stone of Destiny, a mysterious artifact whose original owner has for centuries been acknowledged as the greatest rebel of all time. The belief is that the real stone was not captured by the English in 1296, but was somehow hidden away by the Scots. Buff Perry believes that centuries later, the Jacobites brought the stone with them to America.
To bring it over here was to, first of all, find refuge or sanctuary for it, but also to indicate this is where the Jacobite revolution might really be successful. 1715, the first rebellion, 1745, the second, and then we have the 1770s with the Declaration of Independence. We have the Boston Tea Party, then we have the sort of prolonged war of independence, all brought about by these same people. So foundation stone, meaning this stone now is going to be placed here where the order will have its ultimate political fruition and success.
Well, this is Helena Roric, a painting of her, I believe by Nicholas, and she's bearing the white rose, which came to mean what you swear an oath of secrecy in relation to. And the Jacobites would swear sub rosa with a single white rose. Her left hand, hand and elbow, are right alongside of the casket. The symbology is extremely interesting. Just the bearing of the white rose alone is, to me, highly suggestive of what she felt to be a secret mission that was associated with this stone that they received.
It seems clear that their secret mission had to do with creating a one-world order through the League of Nations and by supporting the New Deal, which both FDR and Henry Wallace believed was the new order of the ages. It was during FDR's administration that the National Archives building was completed, with the figure of what appears to be a perfected man carved upon it. The figure is called Destiny, with the word destiny used repeatedly by the key figures who influenced the dollar bill, FDR, Wallace, and Manly Hall. Is it possible that they all believed the stone of destiny had come to America through Nicholas Roric? But exactly what destiny they had in mind for America and the world must give us pause when we consider the full history of the stone. According to an ancient legend, the stone that fell from heaven is a jewel that was cut from the crown of Lucifer himself. Commenting on this, Manly P. Hall writes that the Lapis exilis, crown jewel of the archangel Lucifer, fell from heaven. Michael, archangel of the sun, at the head of the angelic hosts, swooped down upon Lucifer. During the conflict, Michael with his sword struck the flashing Lapis exilis from the coronet of his adversary, and the green stone fell into the dark and immeasurable abyss. Hall goes on to say that out of Lucifer's radiant gem was fashioned the Grail, or Holy Grail, from which Christ is said to have drunk at the Last Supper. This idea seems to be captured in this depiction of the Grail by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Rossetti was a 19th century esoteric painter who is said to have influenced modern Rosicrucianism. He may well have been familiar with the ancient legend, since his Grail cup appears to be a dark emerald green, mounted in a golden frame. But according to the various legends that are told, the stone of Lucifer was divided into different parts. One part became the Grail chalice, while King Solomon is said to have fashioned another part into a ring. Yet another part became the stone of the Kaaba. While this stone is black, Manly Hall suggests that Islam venerates the color green because of its association with the Grail stone. Others believe the Grail stone is the same as the Emerald Tablet. A depiction of this tablet can be found in the floor mosaic of the Cathedral of Siena, next to an image of Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes Thrice Great. As such, it is known as the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. Written upon it is the Hermetic maxim, "That which is below is like that which is above." The tablet is also called the Philosopher's Stone and is well known in the ancient world. Sir Isaac Newton even did his own transcription of the Emerald Tablet. In the modern world, Carl Jung is said to have had dreams of the Emerald Tablet. Manly Hall obviously knew about it and even published his own illustration. Hall writes that the oldest and most revered of all the alchemical formulae is the sacred Emerald Tablet of Hermes. In her book on the Merovingian mythos, occult author Tracy Twyman writes that the story of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes appears to be yet another incarnation of the Grail as stone. She goes on to say, the legend connected to these items and the stone they came from relate that the stone bounced off Cain's head as it fell to earth, leaving a scar on his forehead in the shape of a red serpent, the mark of Cain. This is what the Grail as stone represents. Meanwhile, Nicholas Roric called his stone a Chintamani, an example of which is shown in this image of a Buddhist figure who holds a greenish Chintamani stone in his hand. While the legends of these stones vary and researchers often disagree, it is curious that both Roric and Manly Hall use the same variant spelling of Eschenbach's term for the Grail stone.
Eschenbach wrote lapsit exilis rather than lapis exilis.
In each of their writings, both Roric and Hall used the term lapis exilis. This might be written off as mere coincidence, if not for the fact that Hall was meeting with Roric in the upper penthouse of the master building. This suggests that they had the same understanding of the stone. Furthermore, both men were involved, along with Henry Wallace, in the theosophical teachings of Madame H.P. Blavatsky, who openly asserted the ancient Gnostic belief that the true God is Lucifer. As such, for Roric to have a piece of Lucifer's gemstone would have had great significance. Dr. Obadiah Harris explained to us the importance of Madame Blavatsky to Manly Hall and to his writings about the founding and destiny of America.
There's another important lady over here that Mr. Hall wanted to honor, and that is Helen Blavatsky, a Russian woman. By the way, her little house in Russia, and I understand now, is the National Museum. But in the early days, he wanted to pay tribute to her contribution, and she was the co-founder of the Theosophical Society, whose headquarters now is in India. She wrote Isis Unveiled, The Secret Doctrine, and it is said, I don't know if this is true, but because she died in 1891. Manly Hall was born in 1901, but it is said that he had read The Secret Doctrine by the time he was 12 years old and understood it. So there's a feeling that Manly Hall had a bond with this woman, a kind of spiritual bond, and that when he wrote Secret Teachings of America, he was really writing the next book for her secret teaching, secret doctrine, that he was taking it farther, and he did. So he felt that in her was a kind of something of the isthmus of the spirit that gave birth to the Philosophical Research Society.
If what Dr. Harris says is true, then Hall founded his entire society on the Luciferian doctrines of Madame H.P. Blavatsky.
Well, Manly Hall, of course, really was one of the leaders of this whole world esoteric movement for probably 70 years or more. And he wrote extensively about the ancient mysteries, and he eventually joined the Masons, and of course moved up very rapidly to 33rd degree Mason, and then to the upper levels of Masonry, which are truly into the Luciferian, which most Masons have no idea even exists.
In his writings, Hall said that when the Mason learns the mystery of his craft, the seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands. This quote comes from the book The Lost Keys of Freemasonry that was first published in 1923, the same year the casket had been delivered to the Rorics in Paris. The Luciferian Freemasonry described by Hall could very well have been known by such Masons as Henry Wallace and FDR, especially if FDR was so familiar with Hall that he sent emissaries to Hall's library. Also consider that FDR's successor, Harry Truman, a fellow Mason, had Hall's books on his shelves. And certainly, Manly Hall's view of Lapis exilis as the gemstone of Lucifer would not likely have escaped the attention of Nicholas Roric. Despite Roric's international mystique and influence in the Oval Office, he eventually suffered a sudden and sharp decline. While searching for seeds and grasses for the Department of Agriculture, he was also heavily involved with the politics of Central Asia. Buff Perry believes that prior to his fall, Roric was working to amalgamate the countries of Asia into a united Buddhist theocracy that would ultimately be joined to a one-world government.
In Nicholas Roric's efforts to bring about an amalgamated, if you will, theocratic Buddhist nation that would have consisted of Manchuria, Mongolia, Tibet, part of China, perhaps part of India, perhaps some of Siberia, he was working with the Tashi Lama, who was suspected by China, particularly, and to this day very much suspected by China, as being subversive to the stability of the region. And as a result of this, Roric became associated with accusations of espionage.
Perry's further suspicion is that, at least for a time, Roric's political efforts were on behalf of FDR's New Deal administration. We recorded the following conversation with Perry in December of 2008. So we've got the what nobody's talking about right now in American media, the North American Union, right, through the Free Trade Agreement, the European Union, which is known about, but we never hear about it on the news.
Right.
And now there's this Asian Union. It seems like Roric was being used by the American government to lay the foundation for or to bring about an Asian Union.
You've got it. That I accept wholeheartedly. And I think when you read it, the details, factual details, it's inescapable that America saw in Roric the capability of creating this great Asian Union. And he was supported by American intelligence. Roric was supported when he was trying to bring together that great new nation. Who was he reporting to? He was reporting to the American consulates in China.
The official story seems to be that once Roric was accused of being a spy, he fell out of favor with his two greatest supporters, Henry Wallace and Louis Horch. But what about Roric's so-called Stone of Destiny, this holy grail that he claimed was in his possession, supposedly buried inside the cornerstone of the Master Building? Whether the stone or some part of it is there or not, Buff Perry has come to the conclusion that Roric's artifact was a cunningly devised fable. Just for our audience, you don't buy into the idea of the mystical, magical nature of this stone?
Absolutely not.
And you think it was a showpiece fabricated by the Rorics, really to beguile guys like Henry Wallace, it seems like.
Yes. I do. I do.
When we first interviewed Buff several years ago, he seemed to have the impression that the Stone of Destiny was the same stone that Roric had in his possession. Today, he believes they are not at all the same thing, and that perhaps this is what caused Wallace to become disillusioned with his guru.
I think Wallace felt perhaps deceived when he's anticipating the arrival of what he called the Stone of Destiny in correspondence, and then ends up with, nothing in effect.
Nevertheless, Perry still believes that Jacob's pillow stone, which is said to be the real Stone of Destiny, was brought to America by the Jacobites and may have been recovered by the French-Canadian explorer La Vérendrye in the 1700s.
The La Vérendrye stone is, clearly has some association with the Stone of Destiny.
But the whereabouts of the stone today are still unknown. As a Jewish researcher, the real stone holds special significance for Buff Perry. According to the Jewish belief, the pillow stone of Jacob is one of the original artifacts that was kept in King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem.
The stone, variously called the Stone of Destiny, Foundation Stone, Pillow Stone of Jacob, and other titles, is expected and is necessary to be in Jerusalem for the final construction of the final temple. The Jews believe that that temple, and not all Jews, but most of the Jews today, active in rabbinical orders that are preparing to, conduct all the rituals in the final temple as we speak, believe that all articles that were in Solomon's temple have to be returned if they're known to exist. If they're not known to exist, then it's a different matter. But all those that are known to exist must be returned and would then go into use again in the final temple.
Buff believes that Nicholas and Helena Roric aligned their Chintamani stone with the Stone of Destiny in order to sensationalize their own cause. But others continue to believe that Roric's stone was from the stars and had real power. The Rorics themselves were known for tapping into the supernatural realm.
The Rorics were particularly eccentric.
Helena Roric spent much of her lifetime channeling a spirit that called itself Master Maitreya, the same spirit that inspired Madame Blavatsky to declare that Lucifer was God. We told you earlier about the letter from Zina Fosdick that describes the contents of the Rajput casket placed inside the cornerstone of the Master Building. But we neglected to mention a few of the items that Buff Perry talked about.
But there are all kinds of other ingredients. There are different fabrics and coins. And
what's the thing? Talk about the coins again.
Well, these are, in some cases, coins that materialized out of what would be considered occultation, out of the other world, in different meetings and sessions that were held by the Rorics. And I'm not saying this off the cuff or because I heard it from someone else. These are recorded memoirs of Helena and Nicholas Roric.
And of course, many of the people who are into the New Age are into astral projection and in contact with these spirit beings. And there really are spirit beings out there. They refer to them as the Masters of Wisdom, or the Great White Brotherhood, or the Enlightened Ones. And they believe that they are guiding society. These are actually demonic forces and demonic beings. And of course, they can materialize and disappear. The average individual says, oh, that can't be true. And yet it is true. And when you talk to the people who are dealing with this, they come in contact with this many times. They have accessed this other dimension, which is truly a demonic dimension. And of course, tragically, it's becoming increasingly apparent here in America as we turn our back on God, and we're not really a secular society. We've gone from being a Christian society to a secular society, and now a society dominated by the occult forces, of which are intent upon ruling the world.
If it's true that the Rorics were in contact with the spirit realm, is it then possible that these same powers could have somehow influenced the design of the dollar bill? While the history surrounding FDR's administration is disturbing, there is said to be a darker level, and one that is openly satanic, in the design of the dollar bill. These allegations begin with a group founded in Bavaria in 1776, known as the Illuminati. The order was founded by a man named Adam Weishaupt, with the alleged purpose of perfecting society.
The symbolism of the dollar bill, Adam Weishaupt, do you really think it has anything to do with the Illuminati, in your opinion?
Is the Illuminati to be defined as Freemasons and Rosicrucians and other secret society members? If that's the case, then yes, I believe the symbol on the dollar bill, the truncated pyramid, is directly related to the Illuminati, because Roric was the Illuminati.
In the 18th century, the original order was thought to have a bloodthirsty agenda, and it was believed that they secretly worshiped Lucifer. George Washington warned about the Illuminati in his letters, while Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were thought to be members of its inner circle. Which brings us to our next speaker. He claims to have been raised in a modern Illuminati family that dates back to the 1700s. He says that, as a child, he was made to practice black magic and witchcraft. His name is Doc Marquis.
My family goes back into the Illuminati all the way back to 1789.
Of course, we have no way of either confirming or denying Doc's claims, but it is worth noting that he has acted as an expert on the occult for law enforcement and the FBI. According to his publisher, in the past he has appeared on and consulted for Geraldo Rivera and Oprah Winfrey, and for shows like Hard Copy, Inside Edition, and Unsolved Mysteries. Doc has been a Christian since 1979, but he says that part of his upbringing in a family that worshiped Lucifer was to be taught about the secret Illuminati symbols of the dollar bill, and that understanding them begins with the Rothschild dynasty.
Meyer Amschel Rothschild had made a very interesting and profound statement. He said, "Allow me to control and issue the money of a nation, and I care not who writes its laws." And he was right.
Meyer Amschel Rothschild is called the founding father of international finance. In 2005, Forbes magazine ranked him 7th on their list of the 20 most influential businessmen of all time.
All this happened back in 1776, and this was during May 1st and shortly thereafter. The significance behind that is that on May 1st, 1776, Dr. Adam Weishaupt, who was a devout Jesuit priest, who was given the chair of the professorship of religious studies at Ingolstadt University, was approached by Meyer Amschel Bauer, who would later change his last name to Rothschild, along with 12 of his most financially influential friends. They knew Weishaupt at that particular time was not only a genius when it came to the occult world, but Weishaupt also had an axe to grind. because it was the Catholic Church that just recently defrocked him. He was no longer a Jesuit priest. And he was going to send a message to them, to the monarchies of Europe, and to all other people who would try to have their will over his.
What Rothschild and Weishaupt came up with was a plan to destroy the old world system of government through monarchies and the church, and to set up a new world order in its place. This is said to be the great plan of all the secret societies.
So what happened? Maitreya Amschel Bauer approached Weishaupt and basically told him, we know you've got the occult knowledge and genius to put it all together. We've got the money. You do it, we'll back it. Just to paraphrase what really happened. So in 1773, Weishaupt started creating what had never been created before. The idea of Illuminism had always been around, ever since the days of Babylon, with the co-founders of being that Nimrod and Semiramis. But no one had ever been able to actualize it. However, May 1st, 1776, the Order of the Illuminati had become a reality under the auspices of Dr. Adam Weishaupt. Now, like other nations, orders, countries and such, they have their two great seals. The Order of the Illuminati does. Those two seals can be found on the back of a $1 bill. People mistake those to be the two great seals of the United States of America. They are not. Those are the two seals of the Order of the Illuminati. And I'm going to explain it to you. In order to understand the seal itself, we have to first take a look at every single thing that composites it. We look at the first part of it on our left, which would be the truncated pyramid one. Above it is a 13-letter Latin expression that says Annuit Corruptus. And directly underneath the base of the pyramid is a 3-word Latin expression, which is Novus Ordo Seclorum. If you were to look up the word, let's say, work, in the English dictionary, you're going to find at least 50 different meanings for it. It is the same thing in Latin. Different words have different meanings. They have more than one meaning. The word seclorum, one of the definitive meanings is secular. Something that is secular is of the world. So it is proper, very proper, to translate the bottom as New World Order, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. The whole of it is saying, announcing the birth of a new world order. This would be Dr. Adam Weishaupt himself, the very first head of the Order of the Illuminati. It was Weishaupt who had himself come up with a 7-part plan to create what he called the Novus Ordo Seclorum, or the New World Order. This is the person responsible for it. The interesting thing about the front of the dollar bill is that there are 4 huge ones. There is one in every single corner. Now if we look at every single one of them, they each have an oval around it, except for the top right-hand one. Now if we look at this blow-up version of it, you will find there's no oval. This is a shield that is surrounding the one. Now, the reason there was a shield here is because this is very similar to the original shield that was given to the Rothschild family when Baron Maitreya Amschel Rothschild had become knighted in England and received the lordship. If we look across the top of this shield, all the way to the left-hand side, it drops down and forms a crescent moon. It's a crescent moon because it represents the female goddess in the occult world. At the bottom of that shield, of that lunar moon, you will see the owl. And it's very obvious once you take a good look at that part of the crescent moon. And it is the same Illuminati owl that is being worshipped at the Bohemian Grove in California by those members of the Bohemian Grove, where presidents, premiers, kings and queens and heads of nations throughout this world have met. You can tell just by looking at this photo, that is a 40-foot owl. It is made out of